How we doing, everybody? Today I am going to talk to you about the biggest disappointments in the history of the UFC, or the biggest failures in the UFC, the biggest flops, whichever word you use, and it does sound like I'm being disrespectful. I'm talking about people, fighters that were fighting in other promotions or that had a big wild reputation, that when they came and signed with the UFC, their careers did not pan out like everybody thought they were going to. And we've got some good ones for you. But listen, I'm not being disrespectful. It is a hard thing to do. To come to the UFC, to become a champion, to be one of the best in the biggest and most popular mixed martial arts organization on the planet is not easy. Like for me, when I signed with the UFC, I was Cage Race champion, Cage Warriors champion, FX3 champion, British super heavyweight kickboxing champion. Yes, super heavyweight. But anyway, when I came to the UFC, people said, oh, well, that's all well and good. It doesn't matter because he hasn't done it here in the UFC. And they're right. Until you come here, until you win, until you show what you're made of, it doesn't matter what you did outside of the organization. And for some people, they had great careers outside the UFC, but when they came over to the Ultimate Fighting Championship, they just couldn't put it together. They just couldn't get on a win streak. And you know, for some people, maybe it was just too soon in their career. Maybe they weren't ready just yet. Had they waited a little bit, they would have been. For other people, the opposite. Maybe they were just too old, too long in the tooth, too much wear and tear on the body. And for some of them, maybe they just weren't good enough. That's a fact sometimes. They just weren't good enough. But regardless of the reason, let's get into the list. I'm going to give you the top 5 fighters that came to the UFC and didn't pan out like everybody thought it would. Number 5, Kimbo Slice. Pre-UFC record of 3-1. The world's greatest street fighter, but sadly, a UFC record of 1-2. All right, Kevin Kimbo Slice Ferguson. This man came to the UFC with all kinds of crazy hype behind him. Of course, he was known for his backyard brawls in Miami, alongside one Jorge Masvidal. Listen, 260 pounds of muscle, bald head, big massive beard, gold teeth. If you are looking for a fighter, if you're looking for a stereotypical tough guy, Kimbo Slice certainly fit the bill. This guy came along, he exploded about the same time as YouTube, and a lot of those videos we saw him beating up guys from America's Dumbest Criminals, just having all-out brawls, and a lot of people could not wait for Kimbo to be signed to the UFC. You know, it's insane that Kimbo actually headlined the first ever MMA event, which was on US television, Elite XC event on CBS versus James Thompson in 2008. Listen, everyone in mixed martial arts, they hated it because he was the most famous cage fighter in the world, which is absolutely a joke. But he was a throwback to the early days of MMA, the barstool brawler. And listen, to be fair to him, Kimbo knew he wasn't a technical mixed martial artist. He knew the skills that he had were a little bit lacking, but he worked hard. He tried to get better all the time. And when Dana said the only way he'd ever sign Kimbo was for him to go through the Ultimate Fighter, well, guess what? That's exactly what Kimbo Slice did on The Ultimate Fighter Season 10. So you got to give him a lot of respect. But sadly for Kimbo Slice, he just couldn't get better fast enough. When you're in the deep end, when you're swimming with the sharks, it's hard. And listen, rumor has it that Kimbo was actually way older than what he actually said that he was. Listen, top marks for trying, but as I say, in the ultimate organization in the world, he just couldn't get it done. And sadly, he was easily beaten by Roy Nelson on The Ultimate Fighter. No shame in that. And he was also knocked out by Matt Mitrione at UFC 113. And sadly, he was cut from the organization after that. He tried boxing, then he went back into mixed martial arts, and he still attracted attention. I mean, the man had charisma, the man had star power, but everyone could see that he also had limitations now. And sadly, Kimbo Slice, Kevin Ferguson, passed away due to a massive heart attack in 2016. And listen, everyone that knew Kevin Ferguson, everyone that worked with him, everyone had the chance to meet him, they all knew that the persona that they saw on the videos in the UFC, that was not the real person. Everyone just said what a sweetheart of a man that he was. And listen, he dared to be great. He made a great career. He had a great name. He had a great look, great charisma. Couldn't get it done in the UFC, but rest in peace, Kevin Kimbo Slice Ferguson. Number 4, Phil CM Punk Brooks. Pre-UFC record, the best in the world. Actual UFC record, 0-2. Look, CM Punk, he was one of the biggest stars in the world in the WWE. But in 2014, he was getting fed up. He was sick of the lack of creativity in the storylines that he was involved with. So he said, you know what? I'm going to sign with the UFC and I'm going to show the world that I can be one of the best. And then at UFC 181 in 2014, he announced to the world that he would be making his Octagon debut in the UFC in 2015. Now look, listen, CM Punk, old Brooksy, he said, listen, I've trained in BJJ and Kempo for years, and I told you on another video, anyone that says they're training in a martial art that ends in an O, a Hapkido, an Aikido, a Kempo, it's not bad with a sword, but anything with an O must go, right? So when he said I trained BJJ and Kempo for a long time, it did set some alarm bells ringing. Now the reality is the UFC may have expected another Brock Lesnar type figure, but with trash talking ability. Now, as we know, Brock Lesnar, he was a freak athlete and an NCAA super heavyweight wrestling champion. But Punk, he had no combat sport credentials whatsoever. CM Punk was the character. He was a brash arsehole. But Phil Brooks, he wasn't. And in the UFC, you're not playing a character. You are being yourself. So the whole thing didn't really work. A lot of the UFC stable were just openly talking shit about the guy. Guys like Nate Diaz.
So as far as I'm concerned, him, the whole situation.
And sadly, things started going wrong for him immediately because he was training at Ruthless Sport and then word kind of got out that straight away CM Punk didn't really know what he was doing. And then when he signed with the UFC, he fought none other than Mickey Gall. And it didn't go well for him. At UFC 203 in September 2016, it went worse than anybody ever expected. Mickey Gall, great fighter, but this was a long time ago. He was still a novice himself. He took CM Punk down in absolute seconds, and the fight was over in just 2 minutes. Now look, listen, no one really needed to see CM Punk compete inside the octagon, but that is what they did. He went back for a second time, and again, all credit to CM Punk. He went up against Mike Jackson at UFC 225 in 2018. Now, to his credit, CM Punk did look like he had improved, but he was absolutely exhausted by the second round, and that was the end of the CM Punk experiment. Bye-bye. Number 3, James Toney. One of the best boxers that ever lived. Signed with the UFC. UFC record 0-1. James Toney, as I say, one of the best boxers, one of the most talented boxers that we've seen in the last 30 years. He won versions of the middleweight, the super middleweight title, light heavyweight, and heavyweight world titles. He beat a who's who, Michael Nunn, Mike McCallum, Vasily Girov, and Evander Holyfield, some of the biggest names in boxing. And now, as we know, Dana White himself was a huge boxing fan, especially the 90s era when Toney was truly one of the absolute best. Now, at the UFC 108 post-fight press conference, James Toney stormed in and challenged the UFC. He said, hey, I want to fight one of these bums. Now, Dana White kind of knew that this was, kind of a freak show fight event, but he was like, I'm kind of interested. And who wouldn't be? One of the best boxers that ever lived, one of the most recent boxing superstars, comes into the UFC, wants to fight. Well, guess what? Here you go, buddy. There's Randy the Natural Couture. Now, as we know, Randy Couture, he was a great wrestler and a multiple weight division champion himself. He was a heavyweight champion and he was a light heavyweight champion. And he said, hey, come on, let's go. Randy Couture versus James Toney. What a fight. What a spectacle. Who doesn't want to see that? And the fight captured the imagination of the buying public, people that didn't really know mixed martial arts. A lot of boxing fans are like, oh my God, if James Toney can land one shot on Randy Couture, he is going to put him to sleep forever. But of course, they forgot this is mixed martial arts. There's a different rule set. There's a little thing called grappling and takedowns, which James Toney knew absolutely nothing about. And for us, of course, we knew the result. It was never in doubt. Couture took him down and choked him out with an arm triangle at UFC 118 in 2018, and it was actually the first time in James Toney's long and storied career that a fight ended for him before the final bell sounded. Now, before Randy Couture choked him out, he did actually punch him a few times, landed a few ground and pound shots, and when he was asked afterwards, why didn't you just choke him out straight away? Why did you hit him first? Randy said, well, listen, we wanted him to have the full MMA experience, didn't we? So, fair play. Randy gave it to him and certainly made it look easy. And look, listen, Randy Couture versus James Toney, that right there is the example of why Logan Paul and Jake Paul, they are calling out MMA, UFC fighters to box them and not to fight them, because that is exactly what would happen. Don't be scared, homie. Number 2, MIRKO Cro Cop. Non-UFC record 21, 4-2. UFC record 5, and 6. Now listen, Mirko Cro Cop had a reasonable run in the UFC, but in Pride, this man was absolutely feared and one of the most devastating strikers that the UFC had. Listen, in the heyday of the Pride Fighting Championships, they had some of the most lethal and dangerous fighters on the planet. We're talking Fedor Emelianenko, Big Nog, Antonio Rogério Nogueira, Mark Hunt, Mark Coleman, Josh Barnett, Alistair Overeem, and of course, the most deadly striker on the planet. We are talking about the one, the only Mirko Cro Cop. Right leg, hospital, left leg, cemetery. Now, for some people, Pride was the #1 MMA organization, but by 2006, the tables had started to change, and now it was clear that the UFC was the premier organization, and a lot of the fighters started to make the jump over, and one of the first ones to go was none other than Mirko Cro Cop, and this man was one of Pride's most devastating strikers. He was the K1 Grand Prix champion. He knocked out fighters like Josh Barnett, Mark Coleman, and Sakuraba, all in Pride, and the Wanderlei Silva knockout, well, that was the stuff of legends for fans and a nightmare for fighters in a ring with him. Now, things got off to a great start for Mirko Cro Cop. He came over, UFC 67, knocked out Eddie Sanchez inside round 1. But things went downhill pretty quickly after that. At UFC 70 in Manchester, England, I had just fought, and he fought Gabriel Gonzaga, who was a big, strong grappler. And that was the way that everybody thought that Gonzaga would win this fight. If he had a chance, he would take him down and look for a submission. But Cro Cop, come on, let's be honest, he's beaten grapplers before, and he'll beat one again. He will land one of his signature high kicks, and he will send Cro Cop to the hospital or the cemetery. But that is not what happened. And you all know by now. You've seen it. You've heard about it. I talked about it recently. It was Gonzaga that landed a head kick. Threw the head kick, hit Cro Cop, disgustingly bent him backwards, all contorted, all distorted, on the ground, leg smashed to pieces, but more importantly, unconscious for quite some time. And of course, then Cro Cop lost his next fight as well, UFC 75 against Czech Congo, where both men need each other in the nuts every couple of seconds, it looked like, and got Czech Congo the nickname Cup Czech Congo, but more importantly, got Congo a victory and started the narrative that maybe the fighters in the UFC were actually better than what they are in Pride. Now look, listen, there's difference to fighting in the UFC than to what there is in Pride. Pride is a ring and the UFC uses a cage. So strategically, it is different. It's very, very different. And I'm not going to go into those finer nuances right now. So maybe that was one of the reasons. But the reality is that Mirko Cro Cop, the legend that he is, and I say that with the greatest of respect, the great career that he had in Pride never really transpired and crossed over to the UFC. Now, of course, Cro Cop had some fantastic wins inside the UFC, but sadly, he also had some losses, and he had some knockout losses. He was knocked out by Junior Dos Santos, Frank Mir, Roy Nelson, Brendan Schaub, and obviously, as I said before, to Gabriel Gonzaga. #1, Ben Askren, pre-UFC record 19-0-1, UFC record 1-2. Now, Ben Askren was extremely accomplished outside of the UFC. 20 fights unbeaten. That is unbelievable. So when you throw in the kicking, the punching, the striking, the submissions, he could still get the job done. And he was a champion in multiple organizations, ONE FC and Bellator. Still two of the biggest outside of the UFC. So when he came over, everybody was paying attention. Everyone was hyped. Everyone was thinking, wow, what is Ben Askren going to be able to do? Now in 2019, when it came for Ben to make the debut, he went up against Robbie Lawler, and in that fight, granted, he showed a tremendous amount of heart. Robbie Lawler, the ruthless one, pounded on his head, and a lot of referees would have stopped that fight, but they didn't on this occasion. And then Ben Askren turned it around and managed to win by choke. And even though he'd won, the writing was on the wall that perhaps he would now struggle to compete with the absolute elite in the UFC. After he beat Robbie Lawler, the next person that he fought would be Jorge Masvidal at UFC 239. Now coming into this one, International Fight Week, a ton of pressure, a ton of hype, and a ton of bad blood. Askren and Masvidal did not get along, and security had to break them up on several occasions. But as we know, the fight was over before it even bloody started. At the start of the fight, Masvidal faked this way, turned, sprinted at him, because he knew Masvidal knew Ben Askren is a wrestler. He's going to look to double leg me, look to take me down. The man is a little predictable. Masvidal knew this, jumped up in the air, landed a flying knee, put him to sleep, and then of course followed up with those super necessary shots afterwards.
They were super necessary.
And then shortly after that fight, Ben Askren lost via choke to Damian Maia in October of 2019. So sadly for Ben, In just 6 months in the UFC, he had been exposed like a pervert in a raincoat.
That's fucking illegal.
Now look, listen, to be fair to Ben Askren, he took his losses like a man, something that not everybody does, okay? So whether it was at the Olympics or getting embarrassed by Jorge Masvidal, he took it on the chin, literally. He took it like a man, and he never made any excuses, and for that, he has my respect. He dared to be great, and because of that, I won't even mention that he was knocked out by Jake Paul in a celebrity boxing match.
That's a low blow.
Anyway, there it is. There's my top 5 UFC letdowns, if you will. Flops, failures, disappointments, whatever word you want to use. Who do you think? I mean, is that a worthy list? Is that the top 5 that you were thinking of? If you've got any other suggestions, put them down there in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Hope you're well. Subscribe, ring the bell. I'll see you later.